All right, well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our workshop series, Growing Your Own Food. Today, gardening experts Glenn McGourty and Kate Frey will be talking about cool season vegetables. So a couple of things before we begin. For those of you who were with us last week, thank you for joining us again. For those of you who are new, welcome. A couple logistics as we get into. So if you could please leave your audio and video feeds off for the workshop, that would be fantastic. It'll help with focusing on our attention to our specialists here as they speak and give their presentations. Also, by leaving your video off, you'll reduce bandwidth issues that we might have. So because of this, since everything will be, our guests here will be, you will be muted and your video will be off. If you could please use the chat box at the bottom of the pop-up menu to ask your questions. We will have a Q&A session at the end of the presentations. Also, just as a reminder, this workshop is being recorded, so just be aware of that. All right, so before we begin with Glenn, who will be giving our first presentation, I'll let him introduce himself as he starts. We'd like to launch a poll similar to what we did last time. And really what we want to know is we just want to know who our audience is. So who are we talking to, and just get a little bit of a sense of what your interest is in our workshop. So here we go. We got a good mix. We have somebody who's a gardener professionally. We have a lot of master gardeners joining us. Welcome. I know a lot of you are in the current 2020 class. So thanks for joining us. Our most popular answer is people who are pretty fairly experienced. So that's really great to hear. So with that, if there is anything else you think I need to mention, guys, I'm going to hand over to Glenn. By the way, my name is Michael Jones. I'm the UC Cooperative and Forest Advisor. Myself and my silent partner, Ryan Kiefer, will be moderating today's workshop.
Well, good morning, everybody. So we're going to continue another action-packed adventure in this series on vegetables. And I'm going to start off by just giving a little background, and then Kate will take over. So here's just some real basic things about vegetables. So what you need to understand is that vegetable is a culinary term, not necessarily botanical. So in other words, we don't have botanical books that are a botanical category for vegetable. It's more or less a horticultural or culinary category because we use many different kinds of parts of plants and plants for culinary use. We use stems when we're talking about celery. Certainly we use leaves. Leaves are also really important in terms of probably when we say vegetables are good for you, we're thinking of spinach and kale and all these other things that kids don't automatically like, but we do as we get older and we realize it's healthy for us to eat them. Certainly flowers, artichokes. Artichokes are, as my brother-in-law describes it, a good carrier for mayonnaise, but they are a high source of fiber, and there's a lot of different ways of eating them, but I consider them to be kind of a ultimate Californian Italian kind of vegetable. Some are fruits. Those are the product of pollinated flowers. Tomatoes come to mind, or zucchinis, anything where you end up starting with flowers and you end up with a fruit that you pick. And those are examples of that. We have roots such as carrots and parsnips and turnips. Then there's tubers, which are underground stems. These are basically lateral underground stems with buds on them from which the plants can grow, and they are plant propagules loaded with starch, and that's what we're after, is that so many of these the root and tuber vegetables store a lot of carbohydrates so the plants can grow through multiple seasons. There's seed pods that we eat, such as string beans and snow peas, and just the seeds themselves, like corn. And so you can see there's a wide variety of plant parts. So we don't really group vegetables botanically, as I said. It's more or less a culinary horticultural designation. The majority of vegetables are annuals. In other words, they're planted from a seed and they complete their life cycle within 1 year. So they typically don't stick around for more than a season. So that's why you have to keep turning your garden over and over again, compared to like your orchard where everything is perennial and it lasts for many, many seasons, and it takes a while to get established. But but our vegetables are up and going and done and finished all usually in the space of a year or many times less. We do have some perennial vegetables, though, that being said. So we have things like asparagus and artichokes are good examples. There's others. And then there's some short-lived perennials and some biennials, but we won't go into too much detail on that. Just recognize that there's quite a lot of diversity in terms of how plants grow in the garden and what their sources are. The nice thing about California is that we can see vegetables, or I mean, we can grow vegetables year round, and there's two principal seasons. There's the cool season vegetables, which tolerate frost, and we mostly grow those in the fall and winter and early spring in the warm area. So we don't grow those in the summertime because it's too warm for them and they won't grow properly. They usually will go to flower as soon as it gets warm, and that's kind of what they're doing, is that they begin their lives as kind of what we call a basal rosette of leaves botanically, which means that they're kind of building up carbohydrate storage and getting ready so that they're taking the cues of soil temperature and day length to flower, so that if you plant lettuce out of season, it almost always bolts. So that's why here in California and in the interior areas, we grow them in the fall. But in the coastal areas, they can be grown year round because it doesn't get hot there, so they will stay kind of in that low vegetative phase. And of course, places like the Salinas Valley are pretty much the salad bowl of the United States, as they say. That's where the majority of our lettuces and other cool season crops are grown year round, because it never gets really warm there, and a lot of times it's foggy and overcast, and it's the perfect place. So here on the North Coast, if you're fortunate enough to live within about 5 to 10 miles of the Pacific Ocean, you often can grow lettuces pretty much most of the year. And what we find in general with our cool season vegetables, their foliage and roots. Some require pollination and flowers, such as peas and fava beans, but most of them tend to be more leaves and stems. Warm season vegetables, on the other hand, they don't tolerate frost. They grow best in warm places. They're often the result of pollinated flowers. And it may not be warm enough in coastal gardens for some vegetables without site modifications, such as cold frames, greenhouses, cover crops, etc. So you can grow really beautiful lettuce, but tomatoes may be really a challenge for you, and watermelons may be absolutely out of the question. So timing is everything when we're dealing with these gardens, and it doesn't matter where you are. There's a proper season to plant. So I call them windows for planting, and you're going to hear about that today during Kate's lecture. So plants need enough time to mature under optimum growth conditions in order to get the end product that you want. And if you do it out of sequence, you're not going to get anything. For instance, if you plant tomatoes and Ukiah in July, you probably won't get any fruit, because probably the plants will start to make fruit for you, but they'll be frozen before you're able to actually engage in the picking fresh fruit. So there's a couple different ways that we tend to modify this, and Kate will talk more about this too, is seeding versus seedling. So you can direct seed some things and have great success, and other things are better done as transplants because of the nature of first of all, some of the seeds don't germinate so well, and second of all, the length of the season is such that you want to be sure that you get these things into the ground as transplants, so that they move quickly and grow into full-grown plants in the time window that you have. So that's basically all that I have to say this morning. It's kind of up to Kate at this point, and we're really fortunate to have Kate because she's one of the most experienced and knowledgeable vegetable gardeners that I know. And thank you so much for listening to me, and let's look forward to a great lecture from Kate.
So I'm going to focus on spring vegetable gardening basics, and Glenn gave a really great introduction. So there'll be a little bit of overlap, but I think that will be helpful overall. So as Glenn mentioned, all vegetables have a particular season that they will grow in. And cool season vegetables in our climate really have to sort of traverse both the cool winter and spring, and then we also grow them into the early summer, and some of them through the summer. Then we've got another window in the fall, and I'll speak more about that. But they're not all created equal, or they don't all grow equally. Some of them are incredibly hardy, like some of the kales and cabbages and chard. Other ones will freeze, like lettuces are more frost sensitive. Some are very short-lived, like some of the Japanese greens, like the pak choi, and some lettuces, and other ones will, like chard, will really almost live an entire year. So it's really important to read the descriptions in seed catalogs, and again, look for descriptions of vegetables that describe them thriving in areas that you live in, whether you're in a hot inland area or you're a coastal area. And then you'll want to plant them in the correct season. Like some spinach varieties are recommended for fall planting rather than spring planting, and the same with lettuces. So you want to pick your varieties to try to find the ones that thrive. There's also lots of information at the University of California, the California Garden Web. You want to keep notes, talk to your neighbors, talk to master gardeners, nurseries, ask them what are their favorite varieties. So just to get more specific, so we've got 2 seasons with cool season vegetables. So most of them you will start in the spring, sort of March, April, May. And so these are things like chard, celery, carrots, beets, onions, leeks, garlic, and parsley. And these cool season vegetables then grow very well over the summer. Some of them you'll be harvesting in summer, some you'll harvest in the fall. So it's a little confusing if you're new to gardening. The cool season vegetables are not all confined to the cool portions of the year. However, they may express their best flavors and textures in the cooler portions of the year, particularly if you're in a hot inland area. And then in this red font here, I've grouped these cool season vegetables: cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, kale, peas, radish, many leafy greens, Chinese greens. These really only grow and do well in the cool times of the year. So you will plant these in the spring. They'll mature in early summer, midsummer. Coastal areas, they'll probably grow all summer. But their textures may be kale or maybe tough, and the flavors hot. Uh-oh, I hear a neighbor child trying to invade the household. And so, but then you have another window for these vegetables in the fall and winter. So this is a little tricky. So you want to plant the seeds of these plants in July or early August, or plant transplants in August when it's still really hot in many places. So you really have to babysit them. Then they will mature in the fall. So you'll have cabbage and broccoli and cauliflower in the fall. Kale in hot inland areas really kind of melts down midsummer. So sort of mid-June, July, it's kind of melted and covered with aphids. You should probably pull it out then, and then you'll be kale-less for about 6 weeks. Plant starts again in August, and then you'll have wonderful kale into the fall. So, so speaking of cabbage, cauliflower, broccoli, all of these plants have days to maturity listed in the seed catalogs or on the seed packets. Some are short season, some are long season. So some may be ready as early as 68 days. Other varieties might be ready sort of 82 days. And so you could plant, say, 3 different types of broccoli to have a sustained yield. And if you're in a really hot area like Davis, you will probably want to focus on varieties that, that mature earlier before the weather really gets hot. So short-lived plants like lettuce, arugula, mizuna, spinach, a lot of the Japanese greens, really need to be planted every 2 to 3 weeks because they bolt quickly in the spring heat. And you just have to judge sort of how often what intervals you'll need to plant them depending on your climate, depending on the variety, and also how much you'll eat at one time. Because growing vegetables, when you grow vegetables, you don't want to have 12 broccoli heads that are ready in 1 week. It might be a little bit too much for most of us to eat. So you want to kind of think about, well, how many lettuces do I eat a week? Or how much broccoli can I eat in a week or 10 days? And so then stagger your plantings accordingly, and arugula as well. So you want to sort of consider a meal plan in a way when planting, deciding exactly how much to plant at one time. So some of these flavors and textures of these cool season vegetables are sharp in the summer, or the textures are tough, even on the coast. Like for instance, kale grows well during the summer, but the texture is tough. So just keep this in mind when you're cooking it. You may want to chop it more finely. And the flavors are really the best when temperatures are cool. Let me just go back. So again, early maturing varieties may be best for hot areas. And so again, for a sustained harvest, let's say of broccoli, rather than planting the same variety 3 times, say every 2 to 3 weeks in the spring, you may want to get 3 different varieties of, say, broccoli or cabbage or cauliflower, and plant an early maturing variety, a mid-maturing variety, and a late maturing variety. So you have really a sustained yield. Again, so this is a very heat-resistant variety of broccoli called Purple of Sicily. It's delicious. Look at how big those plants are. So this one is really great in hot areas, but also grows well in coastal areas. And again, so keep notes and ask around and try new varieties each year. It's really quite a lot of fun to read seed catalogs. So kales, we might think a kale is a kale, but they're really they behave differently in different climates. I'll just talk about a few of these. So just to give you an idea about how much variety each vegetable type has. So like for instance, and how differently they behave in different climates. So this red boar kale here on the top left, this beautiful purple, this is grown as an ornamental in France and in England and in Japan during the summer. This is the most heat tolerant kale. It's also the most nutritious. The deep green colors and purple colors are showing that there's a really high nutrient content. This kale will survive the summer in warm climates and then do well in the fall and really attain these wonderful sort of statuesque proportions. But it'll bolt quickly in the spring as the day lengths start to rise. It's not particularly cold. It's cold hardy in our climate, but the most cold hardy of them all is dwarf Siberian, this next one. This one is sort of lower growing to the ground. This one is incredibly cold hardy. It bolts very late in the spring if you've overwintered it. It's a really great variety if you live in a real cold pocket. Yeah, but it doesn't do well in the summer heat. So again, kales behave differently. This one with the beautiful one with the fringy leaves is called Red Russian or Ragged Jack. This one is not heat tolerant in warm areas. It does great on the coast, but it melts down covered with aphids in late June. This kale on the right is it's really popular. It's sometimes called dinosaur kale or Italian kale. This is also very nutritious and delicious. This one was perfectly hardy for our areas, but give it a little bit colder weather, it can't take the night after night after night of freezing. It also bolts very early in the spring. Down here is one that many people are probably not familiar with. This is Portuguese kale. It is a beautiful, huge plant, more like sort of a cabbage plant that doesn't form a head. This does great in the summer. It doesn't mind the summer heat, and so it does get somewhat tough, but flavor's not bad. However, it's wonderful in the fall. So this one is really a gorgeous plant, and even if you have one of them, it's really worthwhile. And I think there's some wonderful soups you can make with it. So again, vegetables have specific temperature and humidity needs. If grown in unfavorable conditions, pest issues can occur. So in warm areas, many brassicas like kale, broccoli, and cauliflower become prone to aphids in midsummer. So even if you're seeing this on the coast, when your cauliflower is ready, it just means that it is a little bit over mature, the plant is a little stressed, and so therefore it becomes more prone to aphids. So this is what this cauliflower was perfection, and then it was just left on the plant a little bit long, and then the aphids moved in. So this should have been harvested about a week earlier. So just some things to notice. You may imagine that you're being attacked by aphids, your plants are being attacked by aphids, it's a disaster. Well, there's often a reason for that. So also with chard. So a lot of us will be planting chard in our gardens right now, but by fall, it's old, it's senescent, and it also becomes prone to aphids. Mine would always get attacked by black aphids in the fall, even though it was superb all spring and summer. So this is another cool season leafy green that I would replant in August for a robust fall and winter crop. It will last all winter and then into the spring. A lot of people have issues with the leaf miners and chard. And a really easy solution for that is just to regularly and often pick off affected leaves. You have to be vigilant. Put them in a sealed bag in the trash or feed them to the chickens. So when you remove the leaves, you're removing the problem. A fly has laid its eggs in between the leaf layers, and the larvae then emerge and eat the leaf sort of from the inside, and you could see the path. So this has been left a little long. You want to jump on this just as soon as you see any damage, and you could just tear off that portion and use that remainder of the leaf, or if you have chickens, they just absolutely love chard leaves. You want to plant the right varieties in the right season. So onions respond to day length, and just a really easy way to think about this is we plant sweet onions in the fall or very early spring, like Walla Walla, also Italian red, used to be offered as plants up in the Mendocino area. And then we plant keeping onions like yellow, sweet Spanish, the ones that are really pungent to make your eyes water when you cut them. You plant these in the spring. So you would be planting these now. And it's really better to start with plants rather than those little bulbs for this purpose. I've never had any luck with the little bulbs that are sold dried and packaged. So the sweet onions are the ones that you could practically take a bite out of and don't make your eyes water as much. And so these will be harvested probably in June. and then the yellow, the more pungent keeping onions will be harvested sort of July, August-ish. And so these ones will keep for quite a long time. The sweet onions don't keep that long. However, if you planted a big patch of onions, you could start eating them when they're green like this. You don't have to wait till they're all the way mature if you've got a large patch. So garlic is planted in the fall and early spring, and garlic will overwinter if you plant it in the fall, and then you'll be harvesting sort of May-ish, early June. You could eat green garlic too. And so then you could plant it again in spring, and then harvest it in around August or so. You want to plant short-lived vegetables in succession for continuous crops. So from mid-late March until it's too warm, and that'll be a little different for everybody, depending on where you live. Root vegetables are things like beets and carrots, sometimes turnips. You want to plant these at about 4-week intervals. Planting beets and carrots just once in the spring will give you really tough and possibly sort of hot carrots sort of late summer. They're really better when they're a little bit younger rather than months old. Bulb fennel, the same, we want to plant them with intervals about 2 to 3 week intervals. Lettuce, the same thing, 2 to 3 week intervals. Spinach, radishes, and again, you want to think about how much you're going to eat at one time. And so with lettuces, you could harvest the entire head, or you could just pick off the outside leaves for more of a sustained harvest. But you do want to make sure you're going to have to replant seedlings every 2 to 3 weeks, just as spring advances. Spinach, so every year I try new vegetable varieties, and I seeded in my greenhouse in little pots 2 spinach varieties this year. One was called Galilee and from Israel, and the other one is called Gigante di Inverno. And I selected both of these because they're supposed to have excellent heat tolerance. I live in a warm summer area. Already the Galilee has bolted in the greenhouse, and the ones that didn't bolt, I planted in the ground, and they're kind of wimpy, whereas the Gigante di Inverno looks marvelous. The Gigante di Inverno is one that's also recommended for fall planting and will overwinter. I live now in Eastern Washington in Walla Walla, and I was astounded that some commercial organic growers, large scale, plant spinach in the fall, and it overwinters and then is harvested in May the following spring. I had known spinach to be kind of a wimpy plant, so I'm on the lookout for this really strong and robust spinach so I could eat it for weeks and not have to replant it. So these are some of the things that you may want to consider, just depending on what you like to grow and how long you like to have these vegetables. I'm always looking for really robust varieties that grow well and have really a long life. So cabbage and cauliflower, again, you want to use early and late varieties. So you're not besieged with cauliflower or cabbage all in 1 or 2 weeks. You want to kind of stagger that season, and again, look at the days to maturity on the seed packets or in the catalogs. Broccoli, just the same thing. Some of these, some of the more colorful varieties like the purple of Sicily or the green, bright emerald green varieties and the Romanesco varieties, the ones with the wonderful swirling heads, are a longer season. And so you can plant some of the more normal varieties. Hybrids are also good for early season, and then have some of these really fun and interesting varieties that will mature a little bit later in the season. Radicchios are one of my favorite greens. There's the heading radicchios that I think most people are familiar with. that form heads like little head lettuces that are often crimson. But there's a lot of leaf varieties that are just excellent. If you like bitter greens, there's all kinds of wonderful varieties. Again, they very much resemble lettuce, romaine lettuce and head lettuce, and sort of everything in between. And these are also good, best when eaten in the young form. And so seeding every 2 to 3 weeks, though you can leave them. Their flavor is more mild in the fall and early spring. And Japanese greens, Chinese greens, bok choy, pak choy, tatsoi, these are just absolutely wonderful, the whole realm of wonderful vegetables, leafy greens to discover. And these also are sensitive about heat and declining humidity. So there's just really a world of vegetables out there. And so seed catalogs, as I've mentioned several times, are great sources of technical information and also wonderful stories about these vegetables that really gives you an appreciation of the people who have saved them over the years, and then also, again, how well each will do in each locality. There's many more than what are depicted here on the screen. Johnny's Selected Seeds is really kind of the best technical manual for growing vegetables. I use it for both directing seeding rates and vegetable spacing, days to harvest, sometimes pests and diseases. It's really just an excellent resource. A lot of the seeds now are hybrids, so some people prefer open pollinated seeds, in which case territorial seeds is a wonderful seed catalog, particularly if you live in cool areas like the coast. They have a lot of vegetables that are adapted to that area. The whole seed catalog on the right, or Baker Creek Seeds, is just a wonderful read, just sitting in a chair and reading about these vegetables, as well as gaining a lot of information about them and the countries they come from. So these are all great resources, but there's lots more. So we want to buy quality plants. Don't buy root-bound or old plants. They usually do not recover. How do you tell what a quality plant is? Well, one of that is lush and deep green and doesn't have a super thick stem, just in terms of how long it's been sitting in the 6-packs. So it's really important to pull apart the roots and sometimes that's just very, very gently, and other times you might have to do a little bit more. If a plant is especially an annual plant, is root bound, well, trees also, they often don't recover. So I really just try to avoid these plants. And you could tell without popping the plant out if the 6-pack is just, you could tell it's just filled with roots rather than soil. And often the plant's appearance will change as well and become sort of more orangey and pale green if it's been sitting there too long. So Glenn wanted me to make sure to talk about row covers. So these row covers are just fantastic for both early season and fall, for both cool season crops and warm season crops. These row covers, there's a number of different brands, but people sometimes refer to them as Remay. The cloth is Remay, is a lightweight spun polyester fabric that floats over the plants and creates a wonderful greenhouse underneath. So it really stabilizes the temperatures and doesn't allow for much transpiration, creates good humidity, but not excess like plastic would. It lets light and rain through. There's different thicknesses of it. Some is really thick and lets less light through. It's supposed to give greater frost protection, but I always buy the cheapest and the thinnest Remay. It does rip pretty easily and have found that to be excellent even in cold zone 8 areas in Northern California. So this is also good when you're planting tomatoes in the spring. You want to get a jump on the season And so you could plant them under these row covers. So you might notice that it's suspended over the beds on hoops. So you can buy these, or you can make them from PVC pipe or cold rolled steel that you buy at a steel company. It comes in 20-foot lengths, and you could cut it into 6-foot lengths, 6.5-foot lengths with a bolt cutter. And this, I think it's 3/8 size to, but you could probably ask at the seed company sort of what's easily bendable. And so these hoops will really last forever. And so it's best when this reme is suspended over the plants rather than laying on top of it. So I've got a photo of, so inside, again, you have this absolutely perfect little greenhouse, and plants just do great underneath it. You do want to bait for slugs and snails, however, because they love those conditions too. And I like Sluggo, the non-toxic slug and snail bait for that purpose. So we went over soil last time, but I do want to just go over it again. So if you're gardening in raised boxes, put fertilizer down first, then compost, lightly just dig it in or plant into it. And so, so now it's spring and temperatures are warming there. So you really want to have irrigation in place before planting. So this is a really large garden. You want to plant next to your drip line, whether this is drip tape, whether you use spaghetti tubing, or you use emitter tubing or drip tape. So notice how the drip tubing, the drip tape in this case is spaced. It's about 8 inches apart. This is sandy loam. And so 3 lines on about a 3.5-foot wide bed are enough to fully wet the bed. So even if you're using spaghetti tubing, if you do, these parallel lines are much better than the squiggles. And so whatever, if you're planting tomatoes or if you're planting carrots or radishes, you still want to use the same system. You still use the same system. So it stays the same year to year, no matter what you plant, will make life really easy. And so I do want to just mention that, of course, we're all homebound these days, that a really great retail and commercial drip catalog is DripWorks. It's in Willits. They have a fantastic website, great technical support. Everything you need to know about each system is on their website. I just can't tell you how helpful they are. There's schematics, all the specifications are listed there in very, very clear, easy to understand language. Since we're still on this slide, I want to talk about plant spacing. So I've got more slides to talk about this. I think these are green beans. So this is a summer vegetable, of course, needs to have warm climate to plant. But notice how the plants are spaced. Here they're spaced about 8 inches apart. Over here, I think is spinach that's been planted way too closely, seeded way too closely. So a lot of times spinach is best direct seeded. And so you'll have to thin that. If you want to grow this as mini greens and just harvest them with scissors, you can. This would be more appropriate. Still probably a little bit planted a little bit closely. So here's another irrigation slide. So this is a wider bed, and the lines are still spaced about 8 inches apart. The water weeps out very slowly from these drip emitters, as you can see. So this has probably been on about 10 minutes. And this has probably been on the slide on the right about maybe 30 or 40 minutes. So you notice the whole bed is wetted. And so you could plant whatever you plant, like lettuces here or radish, or you have tomatoes widely spaced. This will take care of the entire root zone. So notice this is 1/2-inch drip line here, and then these drip tapes are just plugged in. And then there's a little shut off here. So you could shut the whole bed off when you are done harvesting it. Let's say you're harvesting your onions, you want to turn the water off just to that one bed. It's really great then to have build in a little shut off right at the beginning of it. Sometimes the lines have a little shut off right at the beginning of each. You could get little valves for the beginning of each line. We're going to go into irrigation in more detail in our last class, but I do want to just go over it somewhat now because the weather's warming up and we need to water our vegetables. So most people use this 1/4 inch soaker line for raised. It's best for raised beds, containers, or small beds. And again, notice that there's the same parallel lines here in this triangle, which is sort of a weird shape to try to irrigate. With all of these different irrigation types, so whether it's drip tape, spaghetti tubing, emitter tubing, they all need a specific pounds per square inch of water pressure. And so you really want to note that. And you could easily get a pressure reducer and just put it on the end of your faucet. So remember, raised beds drain fast, they need more frequent irrigation. So if you've got a little bit larger garden, you want to make sure that your boxes and your in-ground vegetables are on separate systems. Just because the boxes drain more quickly and need watering more frequently than your plants in the ground. So again, DripWorks has all these great schematics, so it lists every little part and piece that you will need. So very, very helpful. You don't want to mix sprayers and drippers. The sprayers put out huge amount of water. Here's a little micro sprayer per hour compared to the drippers, which put out much more limited quantity. So these watermelons are just absolutely drowned. Weed control and pathways, old carpet or cardboard can be that you can remove once the soil dries. Here's cardboard. We'll talk more about this in our last class. So we want to space our plants appropriately. Again, this is a large garden, but here's that Portuguese kale. Isn't that just a beautiful plant? So notice how big that gets. So with each plant, we want to look up, well, how big does it get, and look up the recommended spacing. If you just have a few raised boxes, you really want to probably plant things a little more closely. Plant sort of also at the edges of the beds, so you could plants can kind of lean out from the top of the box. So this is that dinosaur lanceolato kale. And so notice it could be spaced more closely than they have it here. So again, so some plants are best direct seeded, like radishes. I think spinach, lettuce is great direct seeded. And some of the Japanese greens are great direct seeded. A lot of the really fast annual plants that you plant in succession, beets, carrots, are direct seeded. Some people like to do transplants, some people like to do direct seeding, some do a combination of both. It just really depends on you. So again, so here's a good photo. This is a summertime photo of a crammed small vegetable box. So notice, I think there's tomatoes in this one, tomatillos, and I think there's a pepper and an eggplant. So one thing to keep in mind is size and longevity. So all of these plants are going to live all summer long, produce all summer long. They're all tall and robust, so they could sort of jostle and fight with each other, and one won't overwhelm another. If there was lettuces in here or radishes, they would certainly be overwhelmed by large plants like eggplant or tomatoes. So you want to think about these things and strategize your vegetable box. I think that's nasturtium spilling over, so the ground around your vegetable boxes is prime for allowing vegetables to spill over and utilizing that space. Here's a former lawn that now is incredible garden in the summer. And so notice this is emitter tubing here, and each bed has a shut off, and this is just this whole thing becomes solid vegetation in the summer. So you can do a lot in your front yard. It doesn't have to be in the backyard or boxes. In ground, I think is actually preferable, in my opinion, for growing vegetables. You could plant a collage of cool season vegetables. This was planted for, this was sort of an ornamental edible planting. And so calendulas are an edible flower. Here's that ragged jack kale or red Russian. Here's that wonderful red boar kale, just looking wonderful in the fall. And I'm not sure what this, I think this is another Siberian variety. And this is purple auric here. This is now often used as the flower, these seed heads by flower arrangers in arrangements. But this is related to spinach, and it's a plant that's been grown, well, the Romans used to grow it. It's spinach-like. It's supposed to be highly nutritious, beautiful. It's beautiful when incorporated in salads. And so there's all kinds of wonderful spring and winter and fall vegetables to grow. It does bolt fairly quickly, so you would want to plant this one in intervals as well. So notice the different lettuce varieties. So a lettuce is not a lettuce, there's just an incredible hue and variety. Notice the spacing, so these are spaced. So they will be touching at maturity, and these are harvested, I think, full heads rather than leaves. We want to plant for beneficial insects and pollinators. So there's a lot of recommendations describe planting parsley or carrots and letting them go to seed. That's so much work in my book, because you have to let these carrots grow all summer, and then they bloom the following year. Plants like Alyssum bloom all summer. You don't have to touch them. Beneficial insects really visit them. Also, cilantro is another really great beneficial insect plant. So even in our flower gardens, many of us can squeeze in some garlic, for instance, next to this wonderful, or not wonderful, bamboo. There's all kinds of raised beds that you can construct yourself or hire someone to do it. This is just made of tin and 4x4s. And notice, I think this black on top of the, looks like a pipe on top of the sharp tin top, I think is pipe insulation. Or you could do very handsome raised beds that in your front yard that are just really a beautiful thing to see. So there's just a wonderful array of possibilities of every type of vegetable. And these photos were taken at the Heirloom Exposition, a National Heirloom Exposition in Santa Rosa that Baker Creek Seeds puts on in September. It's really worth visiting. And so just, these are radish varieties. So from all over the world, so many different textures, flavors, temperature adaptations, and so on. And carrots too. It's just mind-boggling, the array of what is available. And so notice that, so here's one from Istanbul, another one from Japan. Who knows where the Black Nebula is from, maybe from outer space. And beets as well. So white beets, incidentally, are really flavorful and sweet. And there's some beet varieties are excellent even when they're enormous. Notice the watermelons in the background. This is just from one visit to one farmer's market. And so I just want to point out these new cauliflowers, the brilliant, oh, this is purple of Sicily broccoli. But there's also an emerald green cauliflower, and then there's the Romanesco broccoli here, just super cosmic and fantastic. Different types of lettuce, beets, and chards, and so on. So that's the last slide. And also some of you may like to grow giant vegetables. I have a penchant for them. I don't know why. This was a giant cabbage. And this year we've got 3 giant pumpkin plants in our garden, and I guess maybe it's the competitive spirit. So yeah, so that concludes the slideshow, and so I guess we're ready for chat questions. So thank you all so much for listening, and we'll look forward to seeing you the next time as well.
So we're time for chat and questions and answers. And before we look at new questions, there was a good discussion occurring while you guys were speaking. There were a few questions on finding out or determining what your climate zone was. And Jill, a master gardener, posted the link to the California Garden Web information on finding your climate zone. So that link is posted in the chat box. But related to that, there was a question on, how you deal with kind of figuring out what to do in a transitional zone. So for example, Kate is near Camchi, and she's kind of this transitional zone, and they have warm, hot days, but cool nights. And so how do you figure out what's the right plants to plant? Is it kind of like, Kate, you were mentioning, you keep a log and you guess, or is there some kind of recommended guidelines for dealing with maybe these transitional zones?
Well, I would say master gardeners are probably good people to speak to in your particular area, and it's kind of harder to talk to people these days. But I think it's really difficult to find information about very specific microclimates like she's describing. So I think that I think at local nurseries, local nurseries will often carry plants that are adapted to your specific climate. Like there is some wonderful nurseries in Fort Bragg, and so they would be a good resource, and they probably have some varieties they could recommend there as starts. Again, I would read the seed catalogs carefully. Sometimes some vegetable varieties have a wide adaptation of sort of microclimates and climate zones. And I would say Johnny Selected Seeds, I think, purposely carries a lot of varieties that have a wide adaptation. So again, and it's a matter of experimenting, and experimenting is also is really fun.
Yeah, awesome. And related to that was, is there, I would imagine, and I'm no expert, I'm no master gardener, but I would imagine that most of your local master gardener websites will also have gardening calendars. So recommendations on when planting should occur and different types of, gardening activities like prepping beds and stuff like that.
Yeah, and there may be some blogs that some master gardeners have written that address some of these questions as well.
Okay, awesome. Glenn, anything to add, or I think she covered it pretty well on those kinds of issues.
Yeah, the answer, or the other people I'd throw in the mix with a little grain of salt are sometimes old time gardeners who've been around because they've tried a lot of things, and they're becoming rare. But a lot of women's garden clubs are amazing sources of information because they've gardened for years and years in a place, and I have a lot of respect for them and their knowledge and their willingness to share. So don't forget about just people who are experienced, because they can probably tell you a lot. I hate to say it, but Kate and I are starting to fall in that category. We think of ourselves as we're not. So we've seen things and done things, and experience counts. I'm a little disappointed sometimes in our garden centers. Like if you go into some of the chain stores, they have central buyers that are coming from Southern California. So you will often be offered things that aren't necessarily appropriate for your area.
Yeah, I think the locally owned nurseries, I think, are really a lot more dialed in, and some of them propagate their own plants as well. So they really would have good knowledge.
So really, it's crucial to take advantage of your local community and their expertise, and just talk, right? Go out and ask questions.
Yeah, well, often in usual times, there's local plant sales as well that schools or different organizations put on, and so they also would be a great resource. Like the Mendocino Community College in Ukiah has a wonderful plant sale in the spring, and I think sometimes in the fall. I'm not sure what the status
it's going
is.
on right now. It's actually kind of a virtual one, but you can call up, and I'm sorry I don't have the number here. We'll post it later. You can call and put your order in, and then pick it up curbside. And I just did that with our friend Brooke Gamble, and we got a bunch of amazing basils that I've never seen before, and that's another good thing when you know someone like Jim Zarines, who is the horticulture instructor. He's got a good eye for plant materials and tries a lot of things. He's inspired by some of Kate's experiences. So that's what you want to do if at all possible, is try to go source things that are sort of locally proven. It's sometimes hard to do, but worthwhile.
Yeah. All right. So we've had a couple questions and asked for clarification related to the discussion about heat. And so the kind of a question from Lauren asked, when we talk about heat, that's different than something like hot, direct sunlight during the day. So hot means hot temperatures in 24-hour period. She's asking because she's in the lower Russian River Valley where they get lots of hot sun during the day, but at night it cools off. So would it still be okay to plant heat-sensitive plants with this cool night temps providing some kind of respite?
Well, I think it's when you have cool days or hot days and warm nights or excellent, great growing country. I think that the warm days, I think, affect the cool season vegetables, so that you will have to plant them in succession. You will, as the season advances and the temperature is warm, like say lettuce and radish and so on. I think in those areas, sometimes tomato ripening is late. You may want to plant adapted varieties for those areas. And so there's a couple things to think about for that type of environment.
Okay.
Michael,
I
just wanted to also say, can you unmute Sakina, who is from Fort Bragg, to also join in our conversation? Sure. Sakina, are you there?
I'm here.
She should
Hi.
be unmuted.
All right. Nice to be here.
Well, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. This
Welcome.
will add since Kate and I don't live on the coast, we're not as experienced as you are, and you probably have other ideas. And please introduce yourself in just a little bit so the group can know who you are.
My name is Sakina Bush. I was in the first master gardening class that Glenn did over here at the Botanical Gardens about 10 years ago. And I keep learning all the time. And right now I have a nursery business. In my 8th year, I grow veggie starts and herbs and flowers for the coast, do the farmers markets and the grocery stores. So always just love to talk to people about gardening anytime.
Thank you.
Awesome. It's good to have you included in the discussion. All right. Related to the heat question, we had a really good one. What temperatures are considered too warm for some of these cool season veggies? And is this air temperature, or are we talking about soil temperature? Kind of what's general guidelines?
Yeah, I just kind of describe it as Ukiah.
Yeah, I was just gonna say.
It gets very warm, and I find that most of the lettuces and things start to bolt and get bitter when the temperatures start going above about 85 or 90. Kate, what's your experiences?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that 85 and 90 is when you start, the kales start to melt down, and lettuce and spinach really starts to bolt. And so it's really sort of sad that what you want in the summer is a nice salad, but it's hard to grow the sort of traditional salad greens in Ukiah, Lake County, many places, not all places in Lake County in the summer. There are some lettuce varieties that are more heat tolerant. However, I just want to mention that, like romaine is one of the most heat tolerant lettuce varieties. Some of the larger, more robust butterheads are more heat tolerant. And again, it's reading the seed catalogs, and some of them describe good bolt resistance, heat resistance, and so on. But certainly, just if you think about climate, if distant safe in Mendocino, Sonoma County areas, Ukiah is really hot, unrelentingly hot. It can be from June on, temperatures from low 80s to 106. That's hot for these cool season vegetables. And even in places like Healdsburg, Healdsburg is really very much cooler, and so you may have kale there all summer. You often have fog in the morning in Healdsburg. The afternoons may be hot. So I don't know exactly what factors there are that influence some of these, that push some of these vegetables over the limit. But certainly when it's hot from 9, 10 in the morning through the early part of the evening, like in Ukiah, it's really too much for these cool season vegetables.
But don't be sad, because you can grow watermelons and cantaloupes in these hot places can't do in cooler areas. So there's always a trade-off.
You're just rubbing it in. We.
All right. We have a few minutes left. Some really interesting questions and some cool conversation going on. Just real quick, I'll make sure that everybody's asking if there's a link to these videos and the resources. Ryan and I both included it in the chat dialogue. And there's a lot of good contact info and resources that have been posted in the chat. So I'll be sure to make that public on the website with the video. All right, so there's kind of a few questions. There's a lot of questions on pest management. And I know that's an IPM talk would be an entire workshop series in its own. But there's been a lot of issues. People were having a lot of issues with pests maybe this last season and maybe even currently. Do you have some general guidelines or maybe some quick ideas or at least resources they can go to if they're having pest issues, or ways to help manage and control pests before they do become an issue?
Well,
First of all, online resources, the UCIPM pest management for homes and gardens. Ryan, maybe you can dig that up and put it on the chat box for people. But if you go online, there is a whole thing done by the University of California IPM program that is a guideline. And then there's other practical things I think that Kate can talk about, since she's seen it all.
Yeah, well, I do want to mention we are going to discuss this topic in more detail at our last class. So there will be
awesome.
more detailed information on it. But I just really briefly, I always focus in on prevention, and so that's setting up a healthy system with building healthy soils, then planting adapted plants in the correct season, as we've talked about. I showed you the pictures of the cauliflower with the aphids. So there's, or the leaf miners. So there's the season and a reason for these plants, aphids and the chard in the fall. It's just because the plants are old or senescent. They're stressed, they become prone to pests, and planting lots of flowers for beneficial insects like Alyssum or cilantro. So there's a whole number of preventative, super easy, common sense measures to take.
I would add in as well that just becoming very observant of everything in your garden and noticing things right away and responding is always a good way to go.
Right. Like Kate, you were mentioning keeping notes, keeping track and taking notes and being really diligent with managing.
Yeah. There's, well, we'll go into more detail in the last class, but again, just noticing, like every fall I have got black aphids in the chard. Well, why is that? And then finally figuring out, okay, well, maybe the chard is just old. The young chard that I planted in August has none. Why is that? They're growing side by side. So I think using powers of deduction to solve some of these riddles is important.
A simple example on the coast is that we get a lot of powdery mildew on our squash in the summer. And if you plant an early one, in the early summer, that will happen. But if you plant another one later, it'll often cruise through that mildew period without a lot of trouble because it's younger and more vigorous. And so that's a succession of squash that can avoid some of that.
And I think
Yeah,
this is bringing up a good point, is that you don't just do things once on planting. If you're doing this right, you probably have several periods where you should be planting things in your garden and kind of rejuvenating them. I tend to be a little bit more of a one-time planter because the kind of things I want take a long time to mature. So what I love growing is tomatoes, because most tomatoes from the supermarket, I think, are inedible. Once you've had your own very good tomatoes that are vine ripened. On the other hand, when you're doing greens, there's a good case for multiple plantings.
Awesome. All right. Couple more questions that we can get to. Do any of you have any pointers on starting seeds?
Yeah. Well, seeds really need controlled conditions. So bagged potting soil is better than digging up some dirt from the outside, I think, in general. And you want to plant the seeds according to the instructions on the packet, so usually really shallowly. And then you will want to water them in and keep them moist. And so one of the best nozzles is a round, it's called a rose nozzle. And they have a multitude of little holes. The water that comes out, the spray is super soft and will soak the soil surface without splashing the plants out. So that's really important. And another thing is just making sure they have enough sun. Generally, there's not quite enough from people's windows, and so the seedlings will tend to stretch and are really not that healthy. They damp off pretty quickly.
In our early season, when we're trying to start tomatoes or peppers or things like that inside for planting out later, a little heat mat can be really, really helpful.
And this is Glenn. If you're going to plant directly into your seed bed, one of the things that we have a lot of trouble with here are birds. And birds think little seedlings are delicious salad. So I actually keep some bird netting on hand that I put on the bed right after seedling, because otherwise I've seen them just come through and pick everything off. So if you're in a place where there's lots of birds, and we are in one of those places, and I love birds, but not when they're in my garden. So having some bird netting on hand to protect your seedlings when they're small could also be a very good idea. When I direct seed into the soil, I also try to use like a little potting soil or a little bit of compost to cover the seed after I've planted it, because it helps retain moisture close to it as opposed to just plain soil. And you want to be sure that things stay moist in there. And I find that a thin layer of compost about 1/4 to 1/2 inch deep, just around the area where we've seeded, kind of marks where the seeds are, so you know where you're watering. And it also helps keep moisture close to the seed. So a little light watering, especially when we're doing like a August seeding for lettuce, it's really helpful.
Okay, well, that's our time for this morning. Remember, next week we will be talking about warm season vegetables. So that's May 2nd at 9 a.m. Again, that will be with Glenn and Kate, and maybe Sakina will be joining us for the discussion as well. The resources, like I mentioned, will be posted on the website. We shared that link. We'll include the video along with the chat and the questions and resources that were included. So thank you again to our specialists, Kate, Glenn, and Sakina, for your time. And do you have any really quick last minute thoughts or comments you want to make on cool season vegetables before we let everybody go?
Well, I think now it's lovely weather and wonderful time for planting. Just make sure you water in your new starts or your seeds really well and keep them wet for probably for the first week after planting, or not wet but moist. So you probably want to water with a hose with a nice gentle spray, like I mentioned, probably probably every day for at least a few days, and let them settle in.
I would say, if at first you don't succeed, try again. Don't give up.
Yeah, and I would say for those of you in the coastal zone, you're hitting prime planting time. Correct me if I'm wrong, Sakina, but this is when the cool season vegetables should go in.
Yeah, this is the time, and everybody is going nuts planting right now. I've never seen anything like it. It's twice as many people gardening this year, easily.
Yeah, well,
the
they're trying.
victory gardens are back, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks again for our specialists, and thank you to our guests as well for their time and joining us. So we'll see you all next week.